Hello, everyone, a good HaMoed, and welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah shir. Sorry that I had to miss the last couple of days, but hopefully today we'll do a double shir, so we'll pick up at least a day. Mirz Hashem, today we'll be learning Kuf Lamed Daled Amud Beis, as well as Kuf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. Of course, we're continuing to learn Hilchas Yom Tov, how appropriate for HaMoed Sukkos. And we begin today in Siman Tov Kuf Yud Daled with Sif Tes on the top line of Kuf Lamed Daled Amud Beis. Says the Mechaber, Ein Goydlin es hapsila. You're not allowed to twist a wick. So you have a wick and it's made out of multiple strands and you want to twist it to create a wick. You're not allowed to do that. And of course, the Mishnah Berurah says right away, in Ois Cotton Membeis, Ein Goydlin, says the Chavetz Chaim, Pirush, Kishe when you twist the strands of the wick, Avid Kli B'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do that because you're making a wick. That's the Yisr of Tikkun Moneh. Vayin B'Achrayim, and he tells you, take a look in the Achrayim, Tehu Adin de Asr Lahater Klias Hapsila. You're also not allowed to undo a wick. If you have a twisted wick, you're not allowed to untwist it and take it apart. The same way twisting the psila forms it into a keli, it makes a psila, and that's Tikkun Moneh. Taking it apart would be stira. That would be the Isser Seiser. You're breaking a keli. Oy lahater ner shel shava hakalua, or let's say you have a havdalah candle. So it's made out of different pieces of different, what would you call it? I guess strands of wax that are braided together. You're not allowed to unbraid a braided wax candle. And these isurim are true, says the Chavetz Chaim, va'afilu im mechaven l'tzarech hadlaka. These are usher even if you're doing it in order to light the wick. So in other words, you might say, what's the problem? Havara is mutter on Yom Tov. So why can't I twist a wick in order to light it? No, the Tikkun Moneh is an Isser. You're not allowed to do Tikkun Moneh on Yom Tov, even if you're doing it with the intent that you want to go ahead and light it, but you're making a keli. You're not allowed to make that keli on Yom Tov. Okay, so that was the first halacha here in Sif Tes. Now let's go back up to the Mechaber and continue on the second line. So you're not allowed to twist the wick on Yom Tov. And further says the Mechaber, V'loi mahavavin oisa. You're not allowed to singe or char the tip of the wick on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Mem Gimel. V'loi mahavavin. Why would you do this? Why would you singe the tip of the wick? So the Mishnah Berurah says an interesting reason here. Lahasir hanimin. Apparently, when they would make a wick, there would be little wisps of fabric sticking out at the top of the wick. And you want to char those off before you go to light the wick. Otherwise, it doesn't light nicely. So you want to burn the tip of the wick, lahasir hanimin, to burn off these little wisps of fabric, kadesha tidlak yafeh, so that the wick should light and burn nicely. And this is also because of Tikkun Moneh. This is how you complete the creation of the wick, is by burning off those little fringes or wisps at the tip. That's also Tikkun Moneh. It's also on Yom Tov. Continues the Mechaber in the middle of the second line. Aval, however, im eda koshek called tzarka. Let's say you have a wick that's already made, but the wick is not stiff enough. And we've all experienced this. I always go back to Hanukkah because that's kind of what most of us are used to when we're talking about lighting wicks in oil. We're used to Hanukkah. Sometimes you have a wick and it's a little flimsy. It doesn't want to stand up straight. It doesn't stay nicely in the nair. So it's not koshek kol tzarka. It's not stiff enough. Yachal lemacha biyodai. You're allowed to press it in your hand kedei lahakshoisa, in order to firm and stiffen it up. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, nice cotton mem dalid, biyadai. You're allowed to do this. Now, the Mishnah Berurah picks up the lashon of Rashi from Masechtas Beitza, where Rashi says, the Gemara says that you're allowed to do this. You're allowed to press an already made wick in your hand. And Rashi says over there, the tikkun kala'achar yadhu, because while this seems to be tikkun moneh, you are repairing the wick, but this is considered a repair that's being done kalachar yad. This is not the typical way. Now, personally, the way I'm learning pshat in this, I don't think that it means that you're repairing the wick in an abnormal way. I think what it means more is that's not the tikkun so much of the wick. The tikkun of the wick is braiding, twisting the wick. Those are all the normal things that you do to fashion a wick. Once you finish twisting it and braiding it and you get rid of the wisps at the end, you already have a wick. Now you have a little bit of an issue that it's not stiff, so you go ahead and you press it in your hand. That's a kalacher yad type of malacha. It's not a significant malacha that you're doing to the wick that should be usher because of tikkun maneh. I think that's what it means here when it says it's kalacher yad. It's a shvacha tikkun. It's a tikkun kalacher yad, meaning that it's kind of an insignificant tikkun. I think that's what it means. Okay. Continues the Mechabi here in Siftes. Umuter lishroisa b'shemen. You're allowed to soak the wick in oil. Again, I go back to Hanukkah. A lot of people know, me personally, I wake up in the morning, Hanukkah morning, I wake up in the morning, I go, I daven, I come back home. The first thing that I do when I get home is I go ahead and I prepare my Hanukkah lichtalach for the next night. I want to jump onto the mitzvah, and I go ahead and I fill them up, I clean them out, everything, and I prepare my wicks. But also the fact that the wick sits in the oil for a while before you have to light it, the wick soaks up the oil and it lights easier. It's nicer. So over here, the Mishnah Berurah says, the Mechaber says, it's mutter lishroisa b'shemen. You're allowed to soak the wick in oil before you light it. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ice cotton memhei, lishroisa b'shemen, you're allowed to soak the wick in oil, kedei shetidlak achar kach yafeh, so that it should light nicely later on when you're ready to light it. And two key words that the Chavetz Chaim puts in, by yom. Let's say you have 2 days Yom Tov. Yom Tov is Tuesday and Wednesday. You're allowed to soak a wick in oil on Tuesday so that it should light nicely on Tuesday. But you're not allowed to soak the wick on Tuesday so that it should burn nicely on Wednesday, because that would be an act of hachana. Even though it's not a malacha, it's only a tircha, but you're not allowed to do a tircha on the first day of Yom Tov to go ahead and be meichin for the second day of Yom Tov. That's why the Chavetz Chaim says, yes, you're allowed to soak the wick in oil, that's fine, but you're not allowed to do it for tomorrow. You're only allowed to do it if you're going to light it by yom. Now there's a very critical Ramah over here. Of course, every Ramah is critical, but the Ramah puts in a caveat over here. Yes, you're allowed to take the wick and soak it in oil, says the Ramah by Ois Cotton Memvav for the Mishnah Berurah, she'ein boy ner doluk. What you're allowed to do is you're allowed to take the wick and put it into a ner, put it into a keli that has oil in it so that it should soak up the oil. But let's say you have a ner that already has a burning wick in it, and now you want to take another wick and stick it into the oil of that ner so that it should soak up oil. That you're not allowed to do, because in essence, when you do that, what are you doing? You're being mistapek from the ner. You're taking oil out of the ner. So let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here. So the Ramah says you're allowed to soak the wick in the oil if you're putting it in an ner, she'ein by ner doluk, as long as there's no wick already burning in that ner. And he brings this from the Beis Yosef, who brings it in the name of the Rekeach. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Memvav, she'ein by ner doluk. Dikishener doilik, if there already is a wick burning in an air, and now you want to take this new psila, you want to take another wick, and you want to stick it into that nair so it should soak up oil, now you're drawing oil out of the wick, out of the nair that already has a burning flame in it. Oh, you're not allowed to do that. We learned that halacha previously. You're not allowed to take oil out of a nair that's burning. V'amrinan ba'alma, and we said earlier that hamistapik min hashemen shabaner, if you remove oil from a burning nair, chayiv mishum mechabe. That's the isser of kivui. You're not allowed to do that. Now, let's take a look at the Sharatzian over here, Ois Cotton Nunvav. If you remember, we spoke about this very Yesodistik Amachloikis Rishonim, why you're not allowed to take shemen out of a nair that's burning on Yom Tov. We had the Shita of Taisvis and the Shita of the Rosh. So the Sharetzian says over here, this is usher. You're not allowed to put the wick into the burning nair to soak up oil because it's removing oil from a burning nair. Says the Sharetzian, this is usher. Bein lepirish ha-Tosfos. It's usher both according to Tosfos. Why is it usher according to Tosfos? Mishum de be'eshem emayit hashemen, because when you stick in the wick and you allow it to absorb some oil and remove oil from the nair, mache oira lefi shah b'miktsas. Right away, the existing flame is going to go down. It's going to dim a bit. And Tosfos holds that that's the isser of kivui. You're not allowed to do that. Ubein lepirish harash. It's also according to the rush. Da'afilu ein mache oira klal, because the rush holds, even if what Tosfos is saying is not true, even if when you stick the wick in and it absorbs oil, the existing nair will not dim, the rush holds it's usher because of kivui anyway. Because according to the rush, when you stick in a wick and you allow it to absorb oil, what are you doing? You're removing fuel. You're taking away fuel from an existing flame. Now that flame is going to go out earlier. And the rush holds that that's not called gram kivui. The rush holds that if you have a flame and you have a body of fuel that's dedicated to that flame and you take away some of that fuel, that is kivui. It's not gram kivui. So here we have that to stick the wick into the nair where there's already a burning flame, that's going to be asar on Yom Tov, both according to Tosfos and according to the rush. Okay. Now we go to Sif Yud. Says the Mechaber, Mutter lahaser ha-pecham sheberosh haner kishehu doilik. Sometimes, and again, I'm going back to Hanukkah. If you use wicks on Hanukkah, if your wicks burn for a long time, after an hour or so, what happens is you get kind of like a piece of charcoal at the top of the wick. You get some of the fabric of the wick, it carbonizes, and you get like a clump on the top of the wick, and suddenly you don't have a nice flame anymore. And to get back a nice flame, what you have to do is you have to break off, you have to knock off that charred bit of fabric that's at the top of the wick. So the Mechaber says you're allowed to do this on Yom Tov. Mutter lahaser ha-pecham sheberosh haner kishehu doilek. You are allowed to take off the charred piece of coal that's at the tip of the wick while it's burning in order to make a nicer flame. Avol, however, einoi chaytei charosh ha-psila bekeli. But what you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to take a scissor and cut off the tip of the wick. Now, let's be clear on what the Mechaber is saying you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And the Mechaber is telling you in the beginning of Sif Yud, you're allowed to remove the carbonized bit. You're allowed to remove that piece of charcoal that's at the tip of the wick. Then the Mechaber tells you what you are not allowed to do is cut off from the wick itself. You see that the tip of the wick has some of this charcoal on it. So now you want to take a scissor and you want to cut off the top 1/8 of an inch of the wick. So you're going to remove some wick together with the charcoal. That the Mechaber says you're not allowed to do because that is tikkun moneh. You see, if you have a wick and now you want to perfect the wick by doing a malacha, doing a maisa to the wick itself, you want to cut off a piece of the wick and now be left with a perfect wick, that's tikkun moneh. If you just take off the charcoal that's at the tip, that's not called that you're repairing the wick. You're just removing schmutz that happens to be adhered to the wick. The example that I gave when we had such a concept previously was if you have a drinking glass and the drinking glass got dirty, we don't say that it's tikkun moneh to wipe off the dirt. No, you have a perfectly usable glass, you have a finished glass, a good keli, it has schmutz on it. You can take the schmutz off. You have a perfectly good wick, it has some charcoal at the tip. You can take the charcoal off and leave the wick as it is. But you want to clip off some of the wick, now you're repairing the wick. That's tikkun moneh. So that's in a nutshell what the Mechaber says here in Sif Yud. Let's take a look here in the Berurah Mem Zayin, who's going to add some detail to this. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hainu, ma shekvar nisraf v'nase pecham, the part of the wick that burned and became carbonized, that you're allowed to remove. Why? Because val yedei zeh machshich haner, because the tip of the wick became carbonized and turned into coal, it dims the flame. You no longer have a nice flame. Mutter lahasiroi. You're allowed to remove that bit of the wick. Now, before we go further in the Mishnah Berurah, I want to go to the Sharet Zion Ois Katan Nun Zayin. I think it's a very nice Sharet Zion to see. Says the Sharet Zion here in Ois Katan Nun Zayin. What's going to happen to that burning piece of charcoal when you remove it from the wick? Right now, it's burning. You knock it off the wick, it falls to the ground, it goes out. So aren't you doing the malacha of kibui? Isn't that mechabe? Why is that mutter? Still in all, says the Chavetz Chaim, mutter. This is mutter. Kemoi, just the same way, shemutter lahadlik ner lihishtamish la'oiroi. Havara on Yom Tov is mutter. You need the light of a candle. The malacha of havara is mutter on Yom Tov. Guess what? The malacha of kivui, if it's being done with tzoyrich hadlaka, if you're doing the kivui on that little piece of pecham, on that little piece of coal, in order to enjoy the flame of the wick so that the wick could burn, that's mutter. Kach mutter lechabais, mashameneya hadlaka. You are allowed to do kivui. You're allowed to extinguish a coal that is preventing a proper hadlaka. So that's mutter. Okay, now he does say here, "V'ayin b'magen Avram shekasav the efshir the lechabis b'yadayim aser." Maybe this would be aser to do b'yadayim, to do the kivui b'yadayim. Over here, what the mechaber is talking about is you're going to cut off the pecham, it's going to fall to the floor, it's going to go out. You're not doing the kivui b'yadayim. The kivui is happening memela. You're not mamish taking your fingers and extinguishing it. So the Magen Avram says that it could be that to do the kivui straight out with your hand, it could be that would be awesome. Okay, now let's go back and continue the Mishnah Berurah here. Weiter nice cotton mem zayin. The Chavetz Chaim makes a diuk over here in the mechaber. Omi desasam ha-mechaber. The mechaber wrote in Sif Yud, muter lahaser apecham sheberosh haner kishu doilik. It is permissible to remove that little piece of carbonized charcoal at the tip of the wick. Does he make a difference of whether you do it with your hand or you do it with a keli? No. At the end of Sif Yud, he says, you're not allowed to cut off from the wick itself using a keli, using a scissor. So over there, he mentions a keli. But in the first halacha, when he tells you that it's mutter to take off the coal, he doesn't differentiate between using a keli or using your fingers. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, from the way the mechaber wrote this, and he was soisim it, he wrote it stam. He didn't differentiate. Mashma, the implication is dafila b'kli mutter. It's even mutter to cut off the charcoal with a keli. And then the second halacha that he says in Sif Yud, that you're not allowed to cut off from the wick itself, sham shani. Over there's a difference whether you do it with your fingers or you do it with a keli. Shehumi gufa psila. Over there, you're cutting off from the wick itself. So that could be tikkun maneh. So if you do that with a keli, that's bona fide tikkun maneh, and that's aser. But to take off the charcoal from the tip of the wick, that's not tikkun maneh. So you could even do it with a keli. However, the Yeshayimrim, there are those that say, brings this down from the Shabbos, the Taz comes out this way, la halacha. The Yeshayimrim, there are those that say that kavanas ha'mechaber lahachmer b'sayv dvarav gam le'inyin pecham da'asor la'asira b'kli. They want to say that when the mechaber says avaleinu chaytich roish ha'psila b'keli, that word b'keli is going back on the entire sif. You're not allowed to cut off even the charcoal with a keli. Okay. However, bottom line, the Mishnah Berurah says now, the Chol zeh midina. This whole heter of taking off the charcoal is only me'ikar adin. Aval anu b'medina seinu nagu lahachmir. Our minig is to rule stringently on this entire halacha. Bein b'ner shel shemen ubein b'ner shel shava v'chelev. Whether we're talking about an oil lamp or we're talking about some kind of candle made out of wax or fat. Shaloi limchait kol ikar. We don't take anything off of the wick. Afilu pecham, even just the charred tip of the wick. Bein biyad, bein bekeli, whether we do it with our hand or we do it with a keli. We're machmer, we don't do this at all. The ein heter, and the Mishnah Berurah says there's no heter, ela lenapetz hapecham be'etzboi. if you could flick it off with your finger, that you could do. So you're not doing any kind of kivui b'yadayim. And certainly, you're allowed to just nudge the wick a little bit to stand the wick up straight so that it should burn nicer. Okay, Sif Yod Aleph on Kuf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Hamadlik ner shel Yom Tov. When you go to light the Yom Tov neros, tzarich levarech, you have to make a bracha. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Yom Tov. Of course, when you go to tzin the Yom Tov licht, your wife has to make a bracha. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut mem ches. Tzarich levarech asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu. Sha'adlokas ner b'Yom Tov gam kein mitzvahi kamay b'Shabbos. There's a mitzvah of lighting Yom Tov licht the same way there's a mitzvah of lighting Shabbos licht. And therefore, you make a bracha and you say, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu. V'mechal b'Shabbos, Omer shel Shabbos v'shel Yom Tov. If Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, like it does, like we're going to have now, Shmini Atzeres, so then you have to make a bracha. You have to say, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu, lahalik ner shel Shabbos v'shel Yom Tov. And Shabbos comes first, Tadir v'sheina Tadir. V'gam b'Yom Tov sheni shel Golius tzarich levarech. And when you light the licht for Yom Tov sheni shel Golius, you also make a bracha. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu, lahalik ner shel Yom Tov. Now, before we go to the next Siman, I do want to mention over here from a Dirshu footnote, because this is a very interesting machlokes. If you take a look at Dirshu footnote number 42, we know that on Shabbos, very interesting, we know that all brachas have to be made over l'asiyasam. So, for instance, we're now here on HaMoed Sukkos. You make a bracha in the morning, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu on the tilas lulav. What do? We pick up the lulav, we pick up the esrog, because we have to be holding them in our hands when we make the bracha. But we turn the esrog, we pick up the esrog upside down. That way, when we're holding the lulav and the esrog, we're not being mekayim the mitzvah yet. Because we know that in order to be mekayim the mitzvah, we have to be holding the minim derech gidulam. We have to be holding them the way that they grow. So the bottom of the esrog has to be at the bottom. So if we hold it upside down, we're not yet yotzei the mitzvah. So we hold the lulav in the esrog with the esrog upside down. We make the bracha Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu on the tilas lulav. Then we turn the esrog the right way, and now we yotzei the mitzvah. So the bracha always comes before the asiyas hamitzvah. Yet, when your wife goes to light Shabbos licht, what does she do? She lights all the Shabbos licht, and then she makes the bracha Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbos. Why? What happened to over l'asiyasam? The answer is that she can't make the bracha and then light the neros. Because when she makes the bracha Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu, lahadlik ner shel Shabbos, that constitutes her Kabbalah Shabbos. So she was B'Kabbalah Shabbos when she made the bracha. Once she's B'Kabbalah Shabbos, she can't light a fire anymore. So what does she do? She lights the neros first. Then she covers her face. Why does she cover her face? So that she should not be nene. She shouldn't derive any pleasure or any benefit from the neros until after she makes the bracha. So that's the way we try to be mekayim over l'asiyasan as much as possible. So that's why on Shabbos, your wife lights first and then makes the bracha. But how about on Yom Tov? On Yom Tov, you're allowed to light a fire l'tzarich Yom Tov. And Yom Tov licht is a tzarich Yom Tov. So on Yom Tov, she could light after she makes the bracha. So that's why there are many women who have the minig that they make the bracha first and then they light on Yom Tov. But there are women who have the minig on Yom Tov as well, that on Yom Tov also first they light and then they make the bracha. I didn't have a chance to speak to my Rebbe yet, Berurah, but I do know that Rebbe Tzitchila Aleh Shalom, that's the way she did it. She made the bracha first, and the other way. She did it the same way she did it on Shabbos. She lit first and then made the bracha. My wife makes the bracha and then lights. That's what her mother did. So if you take a look here in footnote number 42, it says here, Le'inyan berchas hahadlaka, when it comes to making the bracha on the hadlaka, Shabbos ein lahakdima lahadlaka. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to make the bracha before you light the licht. Kevin Shemekabela Shabbos b'birchasa, because she's going to be Mekabel Shabbos when she makes the bracha of Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbos. V'ne'eseres Lahadlik Achakach Eish, and then she can't light a fire anymore. V'ila b'Yom Tov mutar Lahadlik Eish, but on Yom Tov you're allowed to light a fire. Kasav le'el she'af sheladas HaMagen Avram ein mechalkid be'Shabbos liYom Tov. According to the Magen Avram held you don't make a chilik between Shabbos and Yom Tov mishum loy plug. The Magen Avram held, like I said, what Rebbe Zichila Alel Shalom did. You light on Yom Tov the same way you do on Shabbos. You light first and then make the bracha. Nevertheless, many achreinim hold yesh levarich b'Yom Tov lifnei ha'adlaka, that on Yom Tov you make the bracha first. Kishem shemavarchim al kol hamitzvos leiver la'asiyasan. The cause of Amata Ephraim, I skipped the parentheses here. How about if she lights already when it is Yom Tov? Then then certainly she should make the bracha before she lights. Because over here there's no concept of loy plug. What are you worried about? The whole reason to say that you should do it the same way on Yom Tov as you do it on Shabbos is we want to have a loy plug. We're afraid that if the woman is going to make the bracha before she lights on Yom Tov, she's going to come to make the bracha before she lights on Shabbos. But if she's lighting already Yom Tov night after the Zman, it sounds like there's really no room for a loy plug, because already there's a huge difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos. On Shabbos, she knows she has to light before Shabbos, and Yom Tov, she's even allowed to light on Yom Tov. Sharei hahevdol b'Shabbos Yom Tov nicker. Also, if you go all the way down to the bottom of this column over here in the Dirshu footnote, in the last paragraph, there's a discussion over here. To many people, this is going to come as a big surprise. There's a whole discussion over here about whether or not women should make a shehecheyanu when they light. I believe everybody's meaning nowadays is to make a shehecheyanu, but there are some people who don't make a shehecheyanu. If you take a look, 3 lines from the bottom, the Aruch HaShulchan paskins that we do make a shehecheyanu. The Chen Kaza b'Shalos Teshuvos Sigros Moshe, the Rishivas also paskin shahaya haminig memeshach kama meyos shanim. The Rishivas Atzah writes that for hundreds of years it's the minig that women make a shehecheyanu, and that's what we should do nowadays as well. And he brings down the same from the Stipler. The Stipler also wrote that in his mishpacha the women made a shehecheyanu. Okay, now let's go weiter. Now we begin Siman Tov Kuf Tesvav. Siman Tov Kuf Tesvav begins with a rather lengthy hakdama in the Mishnah Berurah. So, Siman Tov Kuf Tesvav, Din Dvarim Habaim B'Yom Tov Michutz L'Tchum. What is the halacha regarding items that were brought on Yom Tov from outside of the Tchum? Ubay Tes Seifim, and here we have 9 Seifim. So first we're going to turn to the Mishnah Berurah, and let's see if we could work our way through the Hakdama of the Mishnah Berurah here. Hine. Before I begin explaining this siman, I'm going to bring down the words of the Gemara, Berurah, and its explanation, b'derech kitzara, in an abridged way. Isa, the Gemara says in Beit Chavdal Amud Beis, Amar Rav Papa said, Hilchasa, the halacha is, Nachri shehevi dairen liyisrael b'Yom Tov. Let's say a non-Jew brought a gift for a Yid on Yom Tov. He brought him a beautiful fruit basket on Yom Tov. Okay. Im yesh me'oisei hamin b'mechuber. If those fruits, for by and large, are still on the tree now on Yom Tov, then the Yid is not allowed to use this gift from the non-Jew. Why? Because the assumption is that the non-Jew picked this fruit on Yom Tov. So that means that the non-Jew did malacha for you on Yom Tov. He went there and he plucked fruits off the tree on Yom Tov for your benefit. You're not allowed to have the non-Jew do malacha for you on Yom Tov. And if he does, you're not allowed to enjoy the benefit of that malacha. Villa Erev, and at nightfall, Nami Asurin Bichtei Sheyasu. It's still asur after nightfall for the amount of time it would take for that malacha to be accomplished. So if you're not allowed to eat the apple because the assumption is that the apple was picked on Yom Tov, now after Yom Tov, you have to wait enough time that he could have picked the apple off the tree, and then you're allowed to eat it. Upirish Rashi explains this Gemara over there in Peitza, and he says, the Hayasurin, why is this asur? One of the reasons it's asur is Hainu Mishum Muktzah. Not only is there a problem that the non-Jew did malacha for you on Yom Tov, there's another problem, and that is that the apple is a muktzah. The fact that there were apples on the tree, and you didn't go pick apples from the tree, so you should have apples on Yom Tov, you were maktzeh biyodayim, you separated yourself from the apples for the duration of Yom Tov. Even according to Reb Shimon, is more mekel and muktzah, he would be moed over here, because this is like the groi said that smukim that you put up on your rooftop to dry. If you put figs, raisins, dates up on the rooftop to dry, you are maktzeh them biyodayim. You said, I don't want these for Yom Tov because they take time to dry. And at the beginning of the drying process, they're not even royal achila. So the fact that you put them on the roof to dry before Yom Tov, you are maktzeh them biyodayim. So too over here. The fact that you left the apples on the tree, you are maktzeh them biyodayim. Now the non-Jew brought you an apple, it's muktzah. So not only did the guy do malacha for you on Yom Tov, but also the apple itself is muktzah. And when the Gemara says that these fruits are even asur after Yom Tov for the time period of Bichtei Sheyaseh, Pirush Rashi explains what's the reason for that isur. Kedei shelo yehonem mimaleches Yom Tov. Because very nice that the muktzah isur goes off. In other words, we said the apples are muktzah on Yom Tov because you left them on the tree. All right, the minute Yom Tov is over, they're not muktzah anymore. But there's another problem that we mentioned, that the non-Jew did malacha for you on Yom Tov. We can't get hana from the malacha that was done by a non-Jew on our behalf on Yom Tov. If we would eat the apple the minute Yom Tov is over, so we're still getting the benefit of the prohibited malacha that the non-Jew performed for us on Yom Tov. So what do we have to do? We have to wait 5 minutes. Now I'm no longer deriving benefit from the prohibited malacha. I'm not getting benefit from the fact that he plucked the apple off the tree on Yom Tov. He could have plucked the tree off the tree. He could have plucked the apple off the tree right now since Yom Tov was over, and I would get the same benefit. So even though the fact is that he did it on Yom Tov, I'm not considered to be deriving benefit from that. For my purposes, he could have done it even after Yom Tov. Now continues the Mishnah Berurah, and here's where it gets a little complicated. We have to follow. This that the Gemara says that the apple is asur for the time period of Bichtei Sheyaseh, mutarim, but after that time period it's mutter. Hainu afilu erev rishon nami. Let's say the non-Jew brought you the apple on the first day of Yom Tov. Yom Tov is Tuesday and Wednesday. He brought you the apple Tuesday afternoon. Okay, so Tuesday, the apple is asur. Two problems, muktzah and prohibited malacha done on your behalf. Now, Tuesday night, we have to wait b'chdei sheyaseh. Now remember, Tuesday night is still Yom Tov. Tuesday night is going into the second day of Yom Tov, of Wednesday. Tuesday night, I wait b'chdei sheyaseh. I wait 5 minutes so that the guy could have plucked the apple off the tree. Now the apple is mutter even though it's still Yom Tov. Afil erev rishon nami. Even the matzri of the first day of Yom Tov, the apple is mutter after b'chdei sheyaseh. Afagav delil Yom Tov shenihu. Even though it's the second night of Yom Tov, it's still Yom Tov. Why? Mamtin rak b'chdei sheyasu. You only have to wait 5 minutes b'chdei sheyaseh. Mutter achakach, and then the apple is mutter. Why? Miman of shach, because of the miman of shach that we've already learned many times. Im halayla chol, if the second day of Yom Tov is the real day of Yom Tov, So, I'm sorry, Im Halayla Chol, if the first day of Yom Tov was the real day of Yom Tov, then tonight, Tuesday night, is really Chol. So, Harei Himtin B'chtei Sheyeyasu. So, I waited B'chtei Sheyaseh, and there's no muktzah problem anymore because it's already Chol, so no problem, the apple is mutter. V'im Koideshu, and if you're worried that the second day, Wednesday, is really Yom Tov, okay, so then Nimtza Shenilkatu B'chol. So then the fact that the guy plucked it off the tree on Tuesday is not a problem. He picked it during a weekday. He didn't do any prohibited malacha for me. So there's no problem. So again, according to this first sheet over here, let's just review. When the non-Jew plucks the apple off the tree for you on Yom Tov and brings it to you, you have a double problem. You have a problem of muktzah because there are apples on the trees. You didn't pick apples for yourself for Yom Tov. By the fact that you didn't pick apples for yourself for Yom Tov, you were maktzeh all the apples b'yadayim. Now the non-Jew brings you an apple, that apple is muktzah. That's problem number one. Now that problem would go off the minute Yom Tov is over. But there's another problem, and that is that the non-Jew did prohibited malacha for you. And you're not allowed to reap the benefit of that prohibited malacha until after b'chtei sheyaseh. According to this first opinion that we brought down, if the apple was brought to you on the first day of Yom Tov, you only have to wait for b'chtei sheyaseh after the first day of Yom Tov. But once it's b'chtei sheyaseh on the second night of Yom Tov, you're allowed to eat the apple, even though it's still Yom Tov. Why? Because of a mamon of shach. If the second day of Yom Tov is Chol, so what's the problem? It's Chol. You're eating the apple. If the first day of Yom Tov was Chol, so then the prohibited malacha was done on Chol. It was done on a weekday. It's not prohibited malacha. What's the problem? No problem. Okay. And says the Mishnah Berurah here, Ulazu Ashita Hiskimu Rov Rishonim. He says most of the Rishonim agree with this shita. However, the Yeshmin Rishonim, however, there are those Rishonim, Shepirshu, who explain, once we said that you have to wait b'chtei sheyaseh, the Gemara said the guy brought you the apple becomes mutter after the time period of kidei sheyaseh, enough time that it could have been done after Yom Tov. Mashma de be'inan zman haro'u la'asiyah. That means that you have to wait b'chtei sheyaseh during a time that doing it would be mutter. That means Matzah Yom Tov Sheni. You're not allowed to pluck an apple off the tree until Matzah Yom Tov Sheni. So when the Gemara says that the apple becomes mutter after b'chtei sheyaseh, it means after b'chtei sheyaseh beheter, which means Matzah Yom Tov Sheni. Da'azuz man chayil v'roy la'asiyah. The Taimam and their rationale is the lefika hechmiru chachamim lesar kol hayoyim hasheni. The reason why the apple is usher for the entirety of the second day of Yom Tov, even though it was brought on the first day of Yom Tov, and it even continues to be usher on Matzah Yom Tov Sheni for the time period of B'chtei Sheyaseh. What's the reason for that? The reason is, if we would say like the first opinion, that the apple becomes mutter on Matzah Yom Tov Rishon, Chayshinan, then we would have to worry. Shema Yoma l'nachri b'Yom Tov Rishon. Maybe a yid who wants an apple will tell a non-Jew on Yom Tov Rishon, Leich u'lekaitli, go pick apples for me, kadei sheyuchal lechel mehen b'sheni, so that I should be able to eat them on the second day Yom Tov. This yid is going to say, hey, wait a second. I learned this halacha that if a non-Jew brings me an apple on Yom Tov Rishon, it's mutter for me on Yom Tov Sheni because of a mamon of shach. So I'll go and I'll expressly tell a guy to do prohibited malacha for me, go pick apples for me on the first day Yom Tov so that I can enjoy them on the second day Yom Tov. So in order to make sure that that doesn't happen, the Chachamim said if a guy brings you an apple on Yom Tov Rishon, it continues to be asar on Yom Tov Sheni, and it's even asar on Matzah Yom Tov Sheni until after B'chtei Sheyaseh. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. There's another nafkamina between these two opinions. According to Rashi and those who agree with him, they said that the reason the apple is asur on Matzah Yom Tov is because we can't have hana from the prohibited malacha that the non-Jew did for us. Shaykh din zeh Bein lemisha huva b'shviloi ubein la'acherim. Then the apple is usher. It doesn't matter for who. The non-Jew brought the apple for Reuven. Shimon is also not allowed to get any hana from the apple until after Chdei Sheyaseh, because Shimon also is not allowed to derive any benefit from the malacha, the usher malacha that was done on Yom Tov. But according to the second opinion, the hatam shechmiru Chdei Sheyaseh hu Chdei Shelayava loyma lechatchila la'akum leichel lekaitli. The second opinion holds the reason the apple is usher on Matzah Yom Tov is not because we have to wait for Chdei Sheyaseh so as not to derive benefit from the prohibited malacha. That's the first shita. The second shita holds the reason it's usher on Matzah Yom Tov is because if not, a yid is going to ask a guy expressly to pick for him on Yom Tov. Then, Yesh min ha-paiskim. But then there are those paiskim, the Svirlu, who hold the Za'atam Enushach Rakalini Lesser B'Chtei Sheyaseh L'Misha Huva B'Shviloi. This only would apply to the yid that the guy brought the apple for. Avaloi L'Acherim. But other people could get benefit from that apple. What are we going to say? We're going to make a Gzera. A guy brought an apple for Reuven. Reuven has to wait Matzah Yom Tov until Chdei Sheyaseh. Because if we don't make Reuven wait until B'Chtei Sheyaseh, we're afraid that he's going to hire a guy to go pick apples for him on Yom Tov. Once he has to wait B'Chtei Sheyaseh Matzah Yom Tov, there's no reason for him to hire a guy to do it on Yom Tov. Anyway, he has to wait after Yom Tov. But if he's not going to have to wait, he might ask a guy to do it for him on Yom Tov. But that only applies to him. That doesn't apply to somebody else. If a non-Jew brought an apple for Reuven, why can't Shimon eat it on Yom Tov? Shimon's not asking anybody to do anything. So according to this opinion, it comes out of leniency for other people. Also that for other people, not for the person that the non-Jew brought the apple for. Also rak rishon bilvad mishum muktzah. On the first day of Yom Tov, if a non-Jew brought an apple on Tuesday, the first day of Yom Tov, it's also because of muktzah. And after Yom Tov, mutter miyad, it would be mutter right away for everybody else. You don't have to wait for Chdei Sheyaseh. But there are those other paiskim who are more machmer, shesoivrin, they hold the gam l'shita zuha iser Chdei Sheyaseh kol bein loy bein lachem. Okay, so we have these different machlokes in here. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. Oid isa sham b'Gemara. The Gemara over there in Beitza says weiter. Im ein me oisai hamin b'mechuber. Let's say the non-Jew brought an apple for the yid, but it's already winter. The apples aren't on the trees anymore. Then, so there's no worry that the non-Jew did aser malacha for you on Yom Tov. The apples are already off the trees. Then it depends. Toichat chum. If the apple came from within the tchum, mutter, then the apple is 100% mutter. But if the apple came from outside the tchum, aser, then the apple is aser because it came from outside of the tchum on Yom Tov. V'hai aser, and this aser, hiskimu ha-paiskim, the paiskim agree to hurak lechol v'leihanais mizeh. When we say that the apple is aser, if it came from outside of the tchum, it's aser to eat it and to have anah from it. Ava betiltol mutter, but you're allowed to move the apple. It's not like muksa that you can't be metaltal. Over there, by the apple that came from outside the tchum, the Gemara doesn't say anything about B'chtei Sheyaseh. Shma mino, we see for there the betchumin that when it comes to the issue of tchum, hekelu, we're more makel, right? When it's a problem of a guy picking the apple off the tree, you have to wait Matzah Yom Tov for B'chtei Sheyaseh. But when there's a problem of an apple coming from outside of the tchum, we don't say you have to wait B'chtei Sheyaseh, that we have to wait enough time for the apple to come from outside of the tchum on Matzah Yom Tov. They ain't tzarich lahamtin le'erev B'chtei Sheyaseh. Avaroiver Rishonim eskimu, but most Rishonim agree the gam bazeh tzarich lahamtin le'erev B'chtei Sheyaseh, that even by coming from outside of the tchum, you do have to wait for B'chtei Sheyaseh. Ach bazeh, afilu oisan anayigin lahachmit linyin mechuber k'dei hashniya, linyin tchumin anayigin lahakal k'dei rishayna, t'dai lahamtin k'dei sheyaseh le'erev yom t'rishon b'lvad. But in this case, if an apple came from outside of the tchum on the first day Yom Tov, it's mutter matzli the first day Yom Tov. You don't have to wait until after the second day of Yom Tov. Oid yesh kula linyin tchumin, There's another kula when it comes to the Isra of techum. The haba b'shvil Yisrael zeh mutar Yisrael acher. If the non-Jew brought it from outside of the techum for Ruvain, it's also for Ruvain, but not for Shimon. Afilu by b'yom. Okay. Nevertheless, if a nachri brought something from outside of the techum, you only have, and then he put it down, you're only allowed to move that object within its 4 amos where the guy put it down. Because once an object comes from outside of the techum, it's restricted to dalet amos. However, if the non-Jew brought it from outside the techum and he put it into your house, your entire house is considered $1 amos. So you can take it all over the house. If you have an Erev in the community, if the non-Jew brought it from outside the techum and brought it into the Erev, the entire environs of the Erev is considered dalet amos in context of the techum of the object. Va'ata, now says the Mishnah Berurah, now we could go learn Siman Tov Kuf Tezvav. We're going to stop over here for today. Amir Hashem, next time we pick up, we will begin Sif Aleph of Tov Kuf Tezvav. A good HaMoed to everyone again. I'm happy I was able to say share today and a double share. Everyone should have a most enjoyable Yom Tov. If I don't see you before Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Yom Tov, you should, and Simchas Torah, you should have a wonderful Gewaldike Simchadike Shmini Atzeres and a Simchas Torah. And if you can't have a normal Simchas Torah in your shul with dancing and hand holding and singing, then you have to be misamech in your house. You have to be misamech Simchas Torah, Rabbi Yisai. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. We have to be misamech that the Rebbeinu Shalom chose us mikol ha'amim from all of the nations, v'nasan lanu es Torasai, and He gave us a Torah Hagdosha that gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Unlike everybody else, go look outside over there and take a look at the purposeless, meaningless, and wreck of a life that they live. They have no life. But the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us a Torah Hagdosha, and He gave us a life, and He gave us nachas from our families because we have a Torah, and because they live the lives of Erlich Yidden. We have beautiful families and beautiful children, and this is what we have to be misameach. It's not only to be misameach of learning Daf Yomi. Then Nebuch the Amoritz, who doesn't learn, so he doesn't know what that means. He doesn't know what the simcha of Pshat and Taisis is, but he still knows what the simcha of living the life of an Erlich Yid is, and that's what we have to be misameach on. We're not only being misameach on a Geshmak Taisvis, or a Geshmaka Daf, or a Geshmaka page in Mishnah Berurah. We're being misamech that we have a Torah Hagdosha and we live the life of a Yid. That's what we're being misamech. Everyone should have a wonderful Shmini Atzeres and Sukkos Torah. Thank you for joining me for limud HaTorah. Be well.